multiple oil refineries have gone up in flames all around the world. Is this just a case of increased production, aging infrastructure, wear and tear, or is there something more nefarious behind it, such as sabotage? I don't know about you, but I find it a little sus that so many refineries have caught fire during a fuel and oil crisis. Seems a little sus. Who would stand to gain from such a thing? I could think of a few people. So if this has piqued your curiosity, why don't you come with me down the rabbit hole? The episode starts now. Good evening, you're listening to The Truth Tank and I'm your host, The Tank. If this is your first time listening to The Truth Tank, a big welcome. If you are a repeat listener, welcome back. Just before I get too far into the episode, The Truth Tank shop has moved from Etsy over to Spring. If you want to support the show, you can pick yourself up some merch. Just click the link in the show notes or my social media bios and check out the brand new Truth Tank shop. If merch isn't your thing, you can always support The Truth Tank and buy me a coffee, or in my case, you can buy me some tank fuel. You can make a one-off donation or a recurring payment. The link is also in the show notes and social media bios. Now the business part's out of the way. Let's have a look at the topic of tonight's show. Multiple oil refineries have caught fire all around the world on different continents that aren't really connected. There is a noticeable pattern, but is there anything to it? Is this just a case of wear and tear and aging infrastructure, or is the cause of these fires more nefarious? As I mentioned in the intro, I find it a little strange that so many have caught fire in such a short span of time. But maybe this is all coincidence, even though I don't really believe in coincidence. Now, I don't know a huge amount about the details of these fires, when they occurred, what part of the refinery was damaged. And that's what I'll be attempting to get to the bottom of in tonight's episode. We're going to have a deep dive into the cause of the refinery fires. We're going to be having an in-depth look at the patterns of these fires, when they occurred, where they occurred, why they occurred. And you can make up your own mind whether you think this is just an industrial accident or it's something more nefarious such as sabotage. So without further ado, let's get into tonight's show. This is episode 101 of The Truth Tank. The mysterious oil refinery fires, accident or sabotage. 2026 has definitely begun with a bang. I don't think anyone, myself included, could really predict just how chaotic and insane the start of 2026 has been. And one mysterious event that has happened in the start of 2026 that has not got enough coverage on mainstream news or media are the mysterious oil refinery fires. They've been glossed over, but to my knowledge, they haven't really been looked into too heavily. The fires have happened in different countries that are separated by oceans and continents. There's been fires in Australia, Russia, America, Mexico, and Iran. Now, 2 of those countries, you could probably chalk it up to war and drones and things like that. But the other 3, I'm not so sure. Are they just industrial accidents due to aging infrastructure? I don't know. As I've said multiple times already, I just find it really sus that there's been so many that have been clustered together so quickly. But as images spread across social media feeds and news broadcasts, I should say the news broadcasts that actually bothered to cover the story, something else started spreading with the fires, and that is suspicion. Because in a world already struggling with fuel insecurity, a very unstable geopolitical situation, inflation, domestic issues, disrupted shipping routes, and collapsing trust in institutions, especially in government, coincidence no longer feels very convincing. And I don't know about you, but I've lost all faith in all global governments. The world has been run by narcissistic, psychopathic mental patients. I think most of the world leaders should be in the fucking loony bin, because the decisions they are making are going to have massive effects for generations to come. And speaking just to my own experience recently, at the time of recording, the 14th of May, 2 days ago, the budget got passed for 2026. About $1 billion has been cut from Veterans Affairs programs, which I think is absolutely fucking disgusting. The government is really telling us what they think of our fighting men and women. Over $1 billion has been set aside for migration programs, such as making sure migrants follow the law. Money was even allocated to properly test migrants for HIV, because that's really what you want in a country. You want foreigners bringing HIV and diseases with them. That really makes you feel secure. There's the issue with negative gearing being cut, which I don't know a huge amount about. It's not an issue that directly affects me, but it is one that affects a lot of people. I mean, I'm one of the part of the generation that will never be able to buy a home. If I can never buy a home, I'll never be able to afford an investment property. But there's millions of people out there that do, and they're going to feel a negative financial impact because of it. Hundreds of millions of dollars went to lobbying groups who had a hand in drawing up the hate speech laws. And about another 60 million went to digital ID and online surveillance, targeting hate speech and social media and YouTube. So the government's telling us they don't give a fuck about the veterans. They don't give a fuck about the Australian people. They don't give a fuck about podcasters, the arts, basically anyone that isn't aligned with the Communistic Labour Party. Well, I guess both parties are as bad as each other. They're pretty much a uni party at this point. Liberal and Labor are 2 sides of the same coin, as I've said many times before. It's really aggravating and depressing at the same time, because the future of this country looks so fucking bleak now. The future of the Western world looks bleak in general, and I believe the fate of the Western world is hanging in the balance. It has declined so much in the last decade. It's fucking disturbing how quickly it's happened. And yet there's distractions with more war. The UFO files have apparently come out. That's on top of the Epstein files. It's just distraction after distraction. I haven't even had time to look into the UFO files. I'd like to. And there's the case of the missing 12 scientists. So I think it's up to 13 or 15 now, which I will be covering on our future episode. 2026 has just been one load of shit after another. And mysterious fires in oil refineries just fit perfectly into the chaotic narrative of 2026. Rant over. I got a bit off topic there. But back to looking at refineries. As I was saying, as soon as news about multiple oil refineries mysteriously catching fire started making its way across social media and across news outlets, people immediately began to become very suspicious, and rightfully so. I was one of those people. Which brings us to the big question of tonight's episode. Are these refinery fires connected? Or are we watching something even more unsettling unfold? If the oil supply starts to dwindle, will we see more mysterious fires break out? Because I don't think the ceasefire is going to last. I think something's going to happen. The Americans and the Iranians are going to go at it again. The oil price is going to go through the roof again. Fuel prices and food will skyrocket. I think we're going to be plunged back into a uncertain and chaotic second half of the year. It'll be interesting to see what the midterms in the US are going to be like. I think that's going to dictate a lot of what happens in the later months and going into next year. It'll be very interesting to see how popular Trump is at the end of the year and how many more distractions can we have. I think we've had everything. We've had the Epstein files, the UFO files, we've had a war, there's global cover-ups and injustices are going on all the time, the missing scientists, the oil refinery fires. What else can 2026 possibly throw at us? Oh, and then there's the hantavirus, whatever it's called, outbreak on the cruise ship. Where the fuck have we heard this story before? I mean, can the powers that be, can you come up with some more original excuses to try to take over the world? Hire some fucking better writers. Isn't this the exact same story that we were told at the beginning of the pandemic? The only difference is you've replaced a bat with a rat and it's on a cruise ship. That's a very curious X-Files reference that relates to that as well from, I think, season 5. Go check that out. It mentions the hantavirus and a plot from FEMA. It is worth checking out if you don't know what I'm talking about. It's making its way around social media. So to understand why these fires triggered so much public anxiety, you first have to understand one thing. Modern civilization does not simply run on oil. It runs on refining it, and without these oil refineries producing our fuel, crude oil is useless. Trucks, trains, planes, cars all stop moving. Supermarkets go empty, agriculture grinds to a halt, and the supply chain collapses. I go into these scenarios in detail on the Iran Conflict Part 2, Oil, Bread and Circus, so if you haven't listened to that, definitely go check that episode out and you'll get a better idea of what I'm talking about. Oil refineries are the hidden beating heart of industrial modern civilization, and in 2026 several of them have begun catching fire. So let's have a look at the incidents in question. I'm going to go through these incidents one by one. I'll be covering all 5 of the refinery fires so far to see if we can determine any type of distinctive pattern that might help us understand why there have been so many refinery fires in such a small amount of time. I'll be covering each incident in detail. Incident 1, Australia, the Geelong refinery fire. 15th of April 2026, Corio Bay, Geelong, Victoria. One of Australia's last remaining major oil refineries erupts in flames. The refinery in question is called the Viva Energy Geelong Refinery. It sits roughly 50 kilometres southwest of Melbourne, and it's one of only 2 operational refineries left in the country. This particular facility supplies petrol, diesel, aviation fuel, jet fuel, and LPG-related fuel components. So it's a pretty big deal. I don't know if the other one, I think that one's in Brisbane. I don't know if that covers as many diverse ranges of fuel as this one, which makes the Viva fire a critical producer of these fuel types. It also supplies more than half of Victoria's fuel demand. So around 11 PM local time, reports begin emerging of explosions inside the refinery complex. Residents across Geelong describe booming sounds, shock waves, towering flames, and thick black smoke rising into the night sky. The news coverage was pretty dramatic. I remember seeing that on the morning news. The flames were pretty intense. Obviously, it's burning fuel. Fire Rescue Victoria responds immediately. Initial reports suggest what firefighters believe was a smaller industrial fire rapidly escalates into a major refining emergency. Authorities later narrowed the source of the fire to the refinery's gasoline complex, specifically the alkylation unit, sometimes referred to as the MoGas alkylation plant. This section of the refinery plays a critical role in producing high-octane gasoline blend components. The unit processes hydrocarbon streams associated with petrol production. Early investigation findings suggest an early mechanical component failure triggered a gas leak, which then ignited, causing multiple secondary explosions. So the Geelong fire burned for roughly 13 hours, emergency warnings are issued, residents are told to shelter indoors, and smoke drifts across Corio Bay. Fire Rescue Victoria, WorkSafe Victoria, Victoria Police and Viva Energy internal investigators all begin investigating the incident. At the time of recording, no sabotage evidence has been publicly identified and investigators continue examining the exact failure sequence. But the timing is interesting because the fire occurs during the Middle East instability, growing fuel security concerns, and rising public anxiety over Australia's fragile refining capacity and fuel storage. And referring back to my episode, Oil, Bread and Circus, Australia did have multiple large refineries that could cover production, but today they're pretty much all gone, minus the two. Which means every remaining facility carries enormous strategic importance, and when critical infrastructure like this does go up in smoke, and it coincides with periods of geopolitical tension, people do start connecting the dots. Incident 2, Chalmette Refinery Fire, United States. 8th of May 2026, Chalmette, Louisiana, near New Orleans. The PBF Energy Chalmette Refinery processes approximately 190,000 barrels of oil per day, which is quite a lot. Located inside the Gulf Coast refining corridor, the facility is part of one of the most strategically important fuel processing regions in the world. The Gulf Coast is effectively the beating heart of American oil refining capacity, and this region supplies enormous volumes of gasoline, diesel, aviation fuel, and petrochemicals. Any disruption to a plant of this size immediately impacts fuel markets. According to reports, the incident begins in a reformer heater unit. Catalytic reformers are used to create high-octane gasoline components. Investigators believe a heater explosion triggered a major fire. Witnesses describe seeing a large fireball, heavy black smoke, and emergency shutdown procedures activating across sections of the refinery. No fatalities were confirmed, and the fire was eventually contained. But the incident once again fuels public concern because now another refinery is burning, another processing unit, another hydrocarbon fire, another industrial accident occurring during a period of global fuel instability. And for many people watching online, patterns begin forming. Meanwhile, in Mexico, another refinery begins experiencing repeated fire incidents. The Dos Bocas refinery, also known as the Olmec Refinery, is one of Mexico's newest and most politically important energy projects. It's located in Tabasco. The refinery was intended to strengthen Mexico's fuel independence, but throughout 2026 it has had operational instability, numerous fires, and commissioning problems that all continue to plague the facility. Unlike Geelong and Chalmette, many of the Dos Bocas incidents occurred during commissioning and stabilisation phases, which is important because refinery startup and shutdown phases are statistically among the most dangerous operational periods, because systems are partially pressurised, manually adjusted, and are more vulnerable to cascading failure. Reports describe fires near processing areas, smoke, emergency response deployments, and ongoing technical setbacks. And it wasn't too long before critics began questioning whether modern refineries are being pushed too hard, too quickly, under growing political and economic pressure. That one is interesting and does differ from the first two because it wasn't a hydrocarbon fire. It does sound like the refinery was probably pushed to its limit. It also sounds like a political bargaining chip too. However, I think we can probably rule out wear and tear with this facility because it only just recently opened, so it hasn't had the wear and tear that the Geelong refinery has. That's been around for quite a while. So we can rule out wear and tear and age with this one. Incident 4, Russian refinery strikes. And this one's pretty obvious. The cause of the fire wasn't wear and tear, age, or related to hydrocarbon fires or production issues, because unlike Geelong or Louisiana, some refinery fires in 2026 are not accidents, they are acts of war. Russian oil infrastructure becomes increasingly targeted during the ongoing Russia-Ukraine conflict, and this is probably no surprise if you've paid attention to the news at all. You will be well aware that Ukraine has targeted Russian oil refineries for quite some time with drones. And this changes public perception globally because now refinery fires are no longer viewed purely as quote-unquote industrial accidents. Once people see drones hitting refineries in Russia, every refinery fire everywhere else begins feeling a little more suspicious, even unrelated ones. And that is interesting. I guess this one doesn't quite fit the pattern because you could safely say that it's related to the Ukraine-Russia war and just happens to take place during this period of heightened political tension. Let's have a better look at the refinery fires in Russia, because there is a very clear and evident pattern. By 2026, refinery warfare has become normalised inside the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Ukraine's strategy appears aimed at reducing refinery capacity, damaging export infrastructure, disrupting fuel logistics, forcing shutdowns and repairs deep inside Russia. This is a time of war. There's a tactical reason for that. If the Russians don't have fuel, they can't move their tanks, the trucks and the troops. They can't export fuel and they can't fund the war. Even though there are sanctions on Russian fuel, which seem to have went out the window when fuel from the Middle East couldn't make its way through the Strait of Hormuz. For the first time in decades, large-scale refinery systems are being repeatedly attacked in an industrialized nation. That changes global psychology around refinery fires everywhere. The Tuapse Refinery is a major export-oriented refinery. It processes roughly 12 million tonnes annually, and it's a key Black Sea fuel hub. It's connected to marine export infrastructure. The Tuapse Refinery is significant because there wasn't just one incident, there were several. The first happens on the 16th of April 2026. The first major drone strike, refinery and terminal are hit, storage areas ignite, massive fire erupts, and refinery and operations are halted. A few nights later, on the 20th of April, there is a second strike. Port infrastructure is damaged. Additional fires are reported. Residential buildings are affected. 8 days after that, on the 28th of April, the third strike in under 2 weeks, there's a large-scale fire. Evacuations are ordered, and Putin reportedly sends emergency minister to oversee the emergency response. The Ukrainian strikes were pretty significant. A lot of damage was done to the refinery, but there was also a lot of environmental damage as well. There were reports of black rain, benzene contamination, xylene in the air, and soot coating most of the buildings, as well as smoke plumes stretching hundreds of kilometres. But that wasn't the only refinery hit in 2026. Shvex. I'm going to have to Google Translate that one because that is very hard to pronounce.
Novokuibishevsk.
Refinery, Samara region, also owned by Rosneft, the 18th of April 2026. 2 nights after the first refinery was hit, a drone strike reportedly halts primary processing operations. Now, this refinery produces 1.1 million tonnes of gasoline, 1.6 million tonnes of diesel, 1.3 million tonnes of fuel oil. This is a key strike too because that diesel is critical for military logistics. The fuel oil exports generate revenue, which obviously funds the military campaign. Refinery shutdowns ripple into the transport system, and there has been a lot of fuel shortages in Russia. Syzran Refinery, also in the Samara region, April 2026, drone attacks force shutdowns and damage refinery systems. Kryshi Refinery, located near St. Petersburg, which is one of Russia's largest refineries. During March and May 2026, the refinery was attacked by multiple UAVs. According to reports, 3 refinery units were damaged, which resulted in a partial shutdown, and later a complete refining halt. Kryshi is a crucial refinery. It's one of Russia's top 3 refineries. It's reported that annually it produces 7 million tonnes of diesel and 2 million tonnes of gasoline, which obviously makes it a pretty key target for the Ukrainians. Russia has had many attacks on its oil refineries in 2026. Facilities that have reportedly been hit include Perm, Volgograd, Afipsky, Sartov, Kostov, Yaroslavov, Alisky, and Bashneft Novoil. I think it's pretty irrefutable that the Russian refinery fires are directly related to sabotage. They're not due to overproduction or machinery failure. So let's dig a little deeper into the Ukrainian strikes on Russian energy infrastructure. Some of these aren't as widely reported as some of the larger strikes, but they're still interesting to look at because it helps build a pattern of what's going on. Some of these incidents we've seen before, others we haven't. While doing the research for this show, I found a very interesting article on Reuters.com titled Ukraine attacks Russian energy sites, what has been hit, by Reuters, published May 14th, 2026. Ukraine has increased attacks on Russian energy facilities in recent months as peace talks have failed to progress. The following is a summary of the attacks and their impact. Russia's Perm oil refinery has completely halted processing after a Ukrainian drone attack on May 7 caused a fire and damaged equipment. Two industry sources said in 2024, Perm refinery processed around 12.6 million metric tons or 250,000 barrels of oil per day. It produced 2 million tons of gasoline, 5.3 million tons of diesel, 700,000 tons of coke, and 200,000 tons of fuel oil. Astrakhan, I think that's how it's pronounced. Debris from a Ukrainian drone attack caused a fire on Wednesday at a gas processing plant in Russia's southern Astrakhan region. The plant is located near the Caspian Sea and has an annual capacity of 12 billion cubic meters of gas and 3 million tons of stable gas condensate. It also produces gasoline, diesel, and liquefied petroleum gases. A pipeline system in the Urals region. Firefighters were working to extinguish a blaze caused by a technical problem at a unit of a pipeline system in Russia's Bashkortostan region. Bashkortostan region, I think that's how it's pronounced. The Interfax News Agency reported, citing local emergency services. Tupsi, on April 28th, officials said in what President Vladimir Putin described as evidence of increased Ukrainian attacks on civilian targets. Tupsi Oil Refinery, which sells most of its products for export, halted operations following a drone attack on the 16th. Rostan Refinery has suspended oil refining after drone attacks on April 18. Damaged processing equipment, two industry sources told Reuters. The Sizran, I'm fucking terrible at pronouncing things. Oil refinery is able to process 8.5 million metric tons per year, or around 170,000 barrels a day. Nova Gorbeshki, however that's pronounced. We've seen that one before. Primary oil processing at Russia's Rosneft-operated Nova Gibskef refinery has been halted since April 18 after a drone attack. Norsy, Russia's fifth largest oil refinery owned by Lukoil, suspended operations on April 5 following a Ukrainian drone attack. Norsy, which is also Russia's second largest producer of gasoline, can process 16 million metric tons of oil per year, or around 320,000 barrels a day. Karachi oil refinery may restart some production within a month, sources say. It processing at the end of March following a Ukrainian drone attack that caused fires. According to sources, 3 of the 4 primary units are expected to return to operations, adding up to around 60% of the refinery's nominal primary capacity. Ust Laga processing plant, Russian energy company Novatek, has suspended gas condensate processing and naphtha export loadings at the Ust Luga complex after drone attacks caused a fire. The complex has 3 processing units, each with a capacity of 3 million tons a year, refine stable gas condensate into light, heavy naphtha, jet fuel, ship fuel oil, and gas oil. In 2025, the complex produced 8 million tons of gas condensate per year. Ukraine's military said it had struck Russia's Bashneft Novoil refinery over 1,400 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. It processes 7 million tons of oil per year. The Sabotage refinery, controlled by Rosneft, was hit by a drone on the 21st of March, and its crude distillation unit has been shut down since the attack. Alisky refinery, a fire broke out at the Alisky refinery in southern Russia on the 17th of February as a result of a drone attack. The blaze was fully extinguished by the next day. The Ilski refinery produces 6.6 million tonnes of oil and is export orientated. The Volgograd refinery, owned by Lukoil, was shut down on February 11 as a result of a drone attack. The drones hit, among other facilities, the primary oil processing unit, the CDU-1, whose capacity of 18,600 tonnes per day accounts for around 40% of the refinery's total. Akhtar refinery. A fire broke out in the Akhtar refinery on the 12th of February, owned by Lukoil, following a drone attack. It has the capacity of about 6,000 tonnes per day, approximately one-third of the refinery's total. Ipsky refinery. A fire occurred in the refinery in southern Russia on the 21st of January as a result of drone attacks. Ports and tankers. Ukraine has also attacked Russia's ports on the Baltic and Black Seas. Ukrainian drones hit Russia's Primorsk port, oil tankers and military ships on May the 3rd. A fire broke out at a Transneft oil pumping station that delivers crude to Russia's largest export terminal in the Baltic port of Primorsk. After a drone attack on April 23rd, Ukrainian drones struck an oil pumping and dispatch facility in Russia's Samara region on the 21st of April. An official from Ukraine's SBU security service said. Kazakhstan said early in April CPU oil exports via the Black Sea were stable after Russia reported an attack. US oil major Chevron said crude oil exports from the vast Tengiz field had been interrupted. Ukrainian drones sparked a fire at Russia's Seskaris oil terminal in early April. A portion of the oil pipeline at Russia's Baltic seaport of Primorsk has been damaged by Ukrainian drone attacks earlier in the month. Primorsk, one of Russia's largest export gateways, which can handle 1 million barrels a day, lost about 40% of its capacity in Ukrainian drone attacks last month. So interesting. So they are the biggest and most obvious refinery fires that have happened around the globe. And as we've seen, some may be down to mechanical machinery failure, overuse, and others are direct sabotage. And speaking of war, this brings us to the elephant in the room, Iran. Much like Russia, Iran's energy infrastructure has also come under attack from the US and Israel. However, there are a few key differences between the Iranian refinery fires and the pattern of fires that we have seen so far. There are multiple factors that go into the causes of Iranian refinery fires, and there are 3 major overlapping stories that are all happening at once. The first one is baseline industrial failures. So Iran has had repeated refinery and industrial fires for years, mainly due to aging infrastructure, sanctions limiting parts and equipment access, maintenance difficulties, and extreme operating conditions. One of the best examples of this is the Abadan refinery fire. It's located in Khuzestan province, I think that's how it's pronounced, near the Persian Gulf. It also happens to be one of the oldest refineries in the world. It was built in 1912 and once stood as one of the largest refineries in the world and a major symbolic site in Iranian oil history. But in 2025, a fire broke out in Unit 70, caused by a pump leak during repair work. One worker was killed, several were injured. Iranian media ruled out sabotage. I'm not sure how credible it is if Iranian state media does come out and say that it wasn't sabotage, because you've got to take everything they say with a very large grain of salt. They've put the cause of the fire down to aging infrastructure. Abadan has also had decades of operational stress history. Sanctions complicate maintenance and upgrades. In Iran, some refineries are not just industrial facilities. They are aging relics of an entire geopolitical era. And I guess it would be very easy to cover up sabotage in a case like that. But the Abadan plant doesn't just have one incident, it has several. In 2026, it enters a escalation phase. In early 2026, Tehran's fuel depots, refinery-linked infrastructure, and oil storage systems were all hit during the US strikes in the opening phases of the Iran conflict. In March 2026, satellite imagery and reporting showed large oil fires, refinery-linked fires, storage depots burning, and thick black smoke over Tehran. These were not random industrial failures, they were connected to broader military escalation. And I guess to a conspiratorial mind, it's not that hard to link the dots and fill in the gaps, especially when you have a facility that has a history of fire and malfunction, and you layer that on top of the US strikes, frequent industrial incidents, state security, sanctions, covert operations, history. Then you factor in cyber attacks, proxy conflict involvement. So when explosions happen, refineries catch on fire and fuel depots ignite, a lot of people instantly assume that it was sabotage, it had to be the CIA or Mossad, even when many incidents may simply just be a gas leak, aging infrastructure, or industrial negligence. And I guess when it comes to Iran, it's not that hard to imagine that some of these refinery fires could be acts of sabotage. Because after all, Iran is a country that has had more than its fair share of cyber attacks and sabotage over the years. We all remember the Stuxnet attack back in 2010. The Stuxnet cyber attack targeted Iranian nuclear systems. It was widely attributed to US-Israeli cooperation, which permanently changed global perceptions. Because after Stuxnet, people became psychologically primed to believe infrastructure attacks are happening invisibly everywhere. And that directly connects to how people interpret events like the refinery fires in 2026. So it's not hard to believe that maybe some of these fires were acts of sabotage, because the modern world already contains a few examples of covert infrastructure warfare, and that makes public suspicion understandable. And Iran is a great example of this, because Iran exists at the intersection of real covert warfare, real infrastructure decay, and real geopolitical conflict, making it almost impossible for the public to separate accident from attack. When we break the case of Iran down, we see a repeating pattern of themes: aging infrastructure, sanctions pressure, fuel dependency, military escalation, a history of covert operations, cyber warfare, public distrust, refinery fires. Now, Iran does connect to all of these things. But for now, let's have a look at some other less serious refinery fires and shutdowns that have occurred in 2026. So first up, we travel back to Mexico, to the Selena Cruz refinery. It's another major Pemex incident. Located in Oaxaca, Mexico, the refinery has a capacity of 325,000 barrels a day. This incident, a fire and cooling tower at the Hydros 2 plant, caused a partial shutdown of the refinery. Multiple workers were injured, and at least one fatality was later confirmed. This was chalked up to industrial stresses, so we could probably rule sabotage out of that one. Next up is the Rajasthan refinery in India. And this one is interesting because it mirrors the Dos Bocas fire structurally. The incident occurred at the HPCL Rajasthan refinery in April 2026. A fire occurred during the commissioning/startup phase. The cause of the fire is a suspected hydrocarbon leak in the crude distillation unit. So can we chalk this fire up to overuse at a time of increased production? Because this one is pretty much the same as the Dos Bocas incident. At first glance, these incidents appear disconnected. They're in different countries, different companies, and all have different causes. But underneath them sits the same global system, and that system has been under pressure for years. Most people assume oil shortages are about oil production, but modern economies are often constrained not by crude oil itself, but by refining capacity. The world has lost significant refining capacity since COVID, which is interesting because that was a time where no one was really driving anywhere. There wasn't as many flights or ships, so we should really be in a fuel surplus. But I guess if no one's buying, no one's refining. Now, during the pandemic, fuel demand collapsed, refineries shut down, maintenance was delayed, and some facilities closed altogether. Then demand suddenly returned. At the same time, shipping routes were destabilized, the Ukraine war disrupted energy flows, inflation surged, and geopolitical tensions intensified. And I think we're seeing this cycle play out again. Has got all the same hallmarks, same set of circumstances, a similar set of circumstances are playing out. But meanwhile, many refineries globally are aging. Some were built in the 1950s, others in the 60s or the 70s. In the case of the Abadan refinery in Iran, that was built in 1912, so that's basically the same age as the Titanic, so well over 100 years ago. Facilities continue operating decades beyond their original design expectations, and modern refineries operate under extreme conditions. So I guess they go from processing a normal amount of fuel per day, especially take the Geelong refinery, for example. It's probably producing the same amount of oil every day, then all of a sudden this fuel crisis hits and you have to up production, keep things going 24 hours a day, and the system can't handle it. The cause of some of the refinery fires just a simple case of wear and tear and operating beyond their capacity. As we've seen, there is a very distinctive pattern with some of these fires. Most of the causes of the fires are related to the same areas of the refinery. Hydrocarbons are heated under pressure. Hydrogen systems operate continuously. Flammable vapor clouds can form instantly, and massive energy loads move through pipelines every second. And all it takes is one leak, a worn-out valve, and one ignition source, and an entire processing unit can erupt. And I guess they are pretty volatile substances. Oil and all those chemicals, they're explosive and they're flammable. And under that type of pressure, is that the right recipe for accidents like this to happen? And when we look at the evidence, there is a very distinctive pattern with some of these refineries. The causes of the fire are pretty much all the same. It's always a leak in the hydrocarbon areas, vapor clouds form, a processing unit is overloaded, and it leads to disaster. And this is not the first time the world has seen an energy crisis, and refinery instability has overlapped with geopolitical tensions. The 1973 oil crisis saw OPEC embargo, supply shortages, and fuel panic, which placed enormous pressures on the refining systems. And during the 1979 Iranian revolt, global fuel markets destabilized again, and refineries worldwide faced very similar operational strains. And fast forward a few decades, during the first Gulf War, energy infrastructure itself became a target, much like Russia and Iran's energy infrastructure. Oil fields were burned, fuel depots were attacked. The psychological relationship between war and energy permanently changed from that moment onward. And we fast forward to the post-COVID era. Many analysts argue global refining systems have never fully stabilized after the pandemic. Facilities were restarted rapidly, they were pushed harder than ever, and in some cases much harder than they were ever intended to be, and forced to operate in an increasingly unstable geopolitical environment. And the result of that is independent failures begin appearing closer together in time, and to the public, coincidence becomes resembling coordination. However, I still can't rule out sabotage altogether. And this brings us down to the age of pattern recognition. In the 1980s, a refinery fire was usually just local news or a newspaper article or maybe a short TV segment. By 2026, a refinery burns in Australia, a drone strike hits Russia, a processing unit explodes in Louisiana, a refinery fire erupts in Mexico, and within minutes, all of it appears on the same screen. TikTok, X, YouTube, Instagram. The human brain has evolved to detect patterns, especially during times of uncertainty, and especially during fear. And social media compresses unrelated events into a single emotional narrative stream, and suddenly separate industrial failures, wartime refinery strikes, and random infrastructure accidents begin feeling synchronized, even when they're not. At the same time, trust in institutions has eroded. People no longer automatically trust governments, corporations, official investigations, or media narratives, and for good reason. So when critical infrastructure burns, suspicion fills the gap. I guess one of the scarier aspects that isn't often touched upon regarding these refinery fires is maybe the scariest possibility is not that someone is secretly coordinating refinery fires. Maybe the scariest possibility is something far more ordinary and far more dangerous. And that is a global fuel system that has become old, fragile, tightly interconnected, geopolitically exposed, and increasingly unstable under pressure. And these times of pressure seem to be increasing in frequency. Going back to the 70s, you had one crisis probably every so many years. There was always some event that defined a decade. Since 2012, it seems like interconnected global events happen more frequently than they did in the past. Because when systems become stressed enough, independent failures start arriving in waves, and those waves begin looking like conspiracy. The fires become symbols, not necessarily of sabotage, but of a civilization slowly realizing how dependent it truly is on infrastructure it barely understands. And once trust disappears, every explosion starts sounding like it's intentional. And I guess sometimes the most unsettling explanation is not that someone controls the chaos or that somebody is behind it. I think a more unsettling explanation is that nobody does. But on the other side of that coin, we can't 110% rule out sabotage. And why would someone sabotage oil refineries? I think that the answer to that's pretty obvious. Money. I could definitely imagine an oil company or some shady character trying to cripple certain parts of the industry so I don't know, their shares can make more money or their company can profit. Maybe an oil refinery comes in and buys a plant that's just had a fire, takes it over and increases its profits or access to raw materials. Could there be some type of shadowy organisation behind the scenes pulling the strings? Yeah, of course there could. I don't think we can 100% rule that out. Going back to the Stuxnet attack in 2010, sabotage has been used before to take out Iran's nuclear program. A computer virus sped up the centrifuges, made them spin faster than they could handle, and shut down a processing plant or something like that. If you were going to war with a country, why wouldn't you launch a massive wave of cyber attacks? And the US probably has done this to Iran. It's probably easier said than done, but it's not out of the realms of possibility by any means. So what do you think? Do you think this is a coordinated act of global sabotage, or do you think it is industrial accidents that just all happen to coincide with a period of geopolitical instability? It does seem a little too neat and tidy, and I just don't believe in coincidence. I just don't think all these fires could have happened at exactly the same time. Maybe it just does come down to overuse and the refineries being pushed beyond what they've been designed to handle. Maybe that is the cause of these fires. As we've seen, the pattern's the same. It's always a hydrocarbon leak or something like that, or a processing unit that has failed. There is a fuel crisis happening. So it is 100% understandable that this could just all be down to overproduction. The more conspiratorial side of me says it's a little too neat and tidy, and I don't believe in coincidences, and I don't think this is necessarily all a coincidence. Yeah, maybe a couple of plants were pushed beyond their capabilities and failed, but you also have to think there's probably a lot of people out there that are going to make a lot of money with the competition being offline. I can definitely picture a bigger company trying to take out a smaller competitor, taking them out of the market, overloading their systems, then swoop in and buy up the excess. Maybe I'm just talking complete shit, but I don't know, it just seems a little too neat and tidy for my liking. I don't know about you, but I definitely think there's something behind it, and just looking back at all the bullshit and all the lies the people in charge have been telling us for years and years and years, these are the same people that haven't exactly been too upfront about vaccine injuries and deaths related to certain medications. So I wouldn't 100% believe the official narrative. These are the same people that tell us, I don't believe in war, I don't start wars, I end them, and then go to war a couple of months later. They're all fucking pathological liars and psychopaths, and I wouldn't trust any person in politics globally. They're all lying pieces of shit and corrupt as fuck. I think the most obvious sabotage conspiracy angle to all of this would be the war hawks of Washington, the people pulling the strings behind the scenes who want never-ending war. They're obsessed with money, they worship it. They don't care who dies as long as their pockets are lined. These are the same people that pushed the Trump administration to go to war with Iran, despite all the military experts saying this is a terrible idea and it's a war you won't win. I could definitely picture someone like Lindsey Graham, Victoria Nuland, people like that trying to pull the strings to destabilize the world even more, create an even bigger dependency in the oil supply so they can profit more from war. I generally think Trump thought Iran was going to pan out like Venezuela, that they were just going to roll over and give him what he wanted, which hasn't been the case. And these people are so soulless, I can definitely picture them doing something like this, trying to destabilize the market so they can make even more money from shares or their investor buddies who feed them information. They probably all own the companies that have stakes in the oil companies. Whenever someone goes to war, someone else is making profit. So I can definitely picture someone like a Lindsey Graham or a Victoria Nuland making money from destabilizing the global oil supply. The more the war goes on, the more money they make, the more power they can accumulate. And the people pulling the strings for them, whoever's controlling the people that control the president, the shadow government, whatever you want to call them, whoever's pulling their strings, they're the ones that want global instability. Because so far the last 10 years have pretty much been nothing but conflict and drama in a repeating and increasing cycle. Or maybe I'm just talking complete shit and I don't know what I'm talking about. But what do you think? Do you think there is an aspect of sabotage behind all this, or do you think it's just industrial accidents? I'm kind of on the fence myself. I think it's probably 50-50. I think a lot of them are probably industrial accidents. But I don't think sabotage can be ruled out. I can definitely picture more nefarious people pulling the strings behind the scenes to destabilize the world even further. And after all, there is plenty of opportunity in times of chaos. So what do you think? Is it accident or sabotage? And that brings us to the end of the episode. A big thank you to everyone who listened to the end. I hope you all enjoyed it and got something out of it. If you'd like to support the Truth Tank, there's a couple of things you can do. Head on over to the Facebook and Instagram page, give them a follow and a like. Download and listen to your favorite episodes of the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Pandora, iHeartRadio, Castbox, Amazon Music, Audible, or wherever else you get your podcasts from. If you really want to support the Truth Tank, you can head on over to the brand new Truth Tank shop. You can pick yourself up some merch. You'll be supporting the show and you'll look really cool doing it. You can buy the tank of coffee or tank fuel. You can make a one-off payment or a recurring donation of your choosing. Every dollar supports the show and it helps keep me fighting the good fight and trying to find the truth. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell anyone you think might like the show. Help spread it around and get the Truth Tank out there. If you really want to see the show grow and get found, you can leave a 5-star rating and review on your preferred podcast player. And I'll be back in the next week or two with a brand new episode. But until then, I'm a Tank. This is the truth. Truth to tell.